Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Parthaya Pradibodhidam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Gratitam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitaamritavarshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadashaadhyayinim Ambattva Manusantadami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshinim Namostu te Vyasa Vishala Buddhe Fullaravinda Yatapatra Netra Yena Tvaya Bharata Taila Purnaha Prajvalito Jnanamaya Pradipaha Prapanna Parijataya Totra Vetraika Panaye Jnanamudraya Krishnaya Gitamrita Duhe Namaha Sarvopanishado Gavo Dogdha Gopalanandanaha Partho Vatsya Sudhir Bhokta Dugdam Gitamritam Mahata Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsachanuramardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Thank you for joining us and happy April. Finally, spring seems to be a reality here in the northern regions of the United States, and all the birds and animals are all seem to be so happy, and we hear them chirping throughout the day. So it's become a very beautiful time of year, and I hope you're all doing well. Until verse 7, we're in the 13th chapter, right? So until verse 7, Krishna was discussing what is called the kshetra in more detail. As we saw last week, the kshetram is the entire inert creation, this whole universe. And the kshetrajna is the knower, the seer, the witness of all of creation. Then from verse 8 to 12, Krishna shifts the topic to that of jnana. Now jnana means literally knowledge, and even in Amma uses that word jnana, jnanam in Malayalam, to mean knowledge. But here it's taking a unique meaning, especially in this chapter. It means all those inner disciplines and virtues and qualities that should go along with the study of scriptures and the Guru Upadesha or Guropadesha, the Guru's teachings. Ultimately, the medicine to cure our disease of samsara, of repeated births and deaths, the only medicine is the Guru's teaching, Guropadesha. But that teaching cannot help us if it goes in through one ear and out the other. And this is something I think a lot of us struggle with. So that's why Krishna is giving us a list of 20 virtues that will help us in understanding, retaining, and putting into practice the Guru's teachings. And I don't think anybody would be disinterested in hearing those qualities, because it's probably the biggest stumbling block we find on the path. No matter how sincere we are, we still struggle to do these things. And this is not going to be an exhaustive list, because Krishna is going to talk about these qualities, more qualities, even in more detail in chapters 16 and 17. So this is sort of a preview to that, and it will be continued. In the last verse we covered, Krishna gave 9 virtues, 9 out of 20. So they were humility, this is just to remind you all, humility, freedom from pretentiousness, non-violence, forbearance, uprightness, or we could say rectitude, service to the Guru, purity, meaning inner and outer, steadfastness, and self-restraint. Today, we're going to receive the remaining 11 of those virtues. So let us all chant verse 9 of chapter 13, and you can repeat after me. Indriyarteshu vairagyam anahankara evacha janma mrityu jara vyadhi dukkha doshanudarshanam. So I'll read out the meaning. You can keep the slide there on the screen so they can see the meaning. So the meaning is dispassion, or we can see, I take some liberties in translating the text. So if you have the ashram Bhagavad Gita in hand, that's what we normally use. But I do take some liberties in editing it. So I'm going to read out the edited version, which I'm doing on my own. So it's basically indifference towards sense objects, and also absence of egoism, reflection on the suffering and detriment associated with birth, death, old age, and disease. So it's not a huge difference from what the ashram text says, but I changed dispassion into indifference, and in the middle, this pain and evils, I felt it was a little archaic English. So I made it reflection on the suffering and detriment associated with birth, death, old age, and disease. Meaning is the same, just trying to make it a little more, flow a little bit better for the English that we're used to. So these, we got 3 virtues in this verse, and we're going to go through those in detail. Where, more detail some places when needed, and then, but otherwise, sometimes we may have some short explanations. On this one verse, Jnanadev, who you know I love dearly, a saint who lived about 500, 600 years ago, he wrote 5 pages, which for him is quite a bit. But first I wanted to share what he said at the beginning of his commentary on this verse. He says, one who has attained this condition, what was just explained in the verse, which is called a well-controlled mind, such a person is an embodiment of the victory of knowledge. One whose mandates are quietly and submissively obeyed by his mind should be known as the very knowledge itself in human form. So, if you ever felt some dismay at your mind not listening to your mandates, I'm going to do this, and the mind's like, nope, no dice. And then you have to have this big war with your mind, and it's not fun. Well, here he's saying, somebody whose mandates are quietly and submissively obeyed by his mind is the very knowledge itself, spiritual knowledge itself, in human form. And I would like to propose that, this is Amma, basically. That's who they're saying. Amma, just imagine, how long she gives darshan every day. particularly up to before COVID started. Of course, that put a monkey wrench in everything. But we all know just how much time and energy she spent on darshan before that. And with each year, it would get more and more and more. And she does it day after day, every week, month, year. For decades, she's been doing it nonstop. So don't you think her body is going to be saying, stop it, stop it. I don't want to do this anymore, because no human being could actually survive all that. She says it's only God's grace that this body, pointing to her body, is still in existence. He says if you put a metal sculpture on the stage and had 30-some million people, maybe it must be 40 million people by now, hug it, there would be nothing left, just some, dust on the stage. It would be all that's left. But she says it's God's grace. I mean, we know it's her grace for herself, so that she can continue to give compassion and solace to everybody. But this Jnanadeva is describing Amma in my mind. And there was an occasion, maybe about 5 to 10 years ago, I would say, when we were on the East Coast. It was during the summer tour. And East Coast means that she had just, spent 6 weeks really of a grueling tour schedule, hugging hundreds of thousands of people across North America. And so on that it was about Boston, so it was just before we went to Canada, and it was Devi Baba, so it was the last day. And during Devi Baba, you might have seen in the videos of Amma, singing bhajans in India, sometimes, she will stretch her arms. Maybe she was laughing so much when the kids were saying really cute things, and then so like a muscle gets pulled, and so she'll move her arms to try and, loosen the muscles. So, there was an occasion like that, and then her, some muscle was not cooperating, in her upper body, right? So she just suddenly stopped, and she pointed there, and she says, "Mind, don't forget what you came here for." And she just gave that command, and everything was solved. What if we could do that, I want to lose 10 pounds, or, I want to gain 10 pounds of muscle. And you say, I'm going to do that. And the mind's like, no way, I'm not going to do that. And then we have to be like beggars. Please help me. Please don't sabotage my efforts. So we're like a beggar to the mind, whereas Amma is the ruler. So this is the state that we want to attain. And dispassion he refers to in this verse, or we could call it indifference. I know dispassion and words like detachment can sometimes really scare people in the West. The English translation of vairagya is a little difficult. So it just means really the freedom from attachment. So we can call it non-attachment. Whatever you choose, we should think of it as it's a positive thing. It's not like a real torture. If you have less attachment, you're going to be happy. So in the previous verse, those qualities that I mentioned, they kind of represent the initial characteristics we need on the path. And this verse 9, picks up where the previous verse left off. So just imagine, without dispassion for sense pleasures, how would we dedicate ourselves to spirituality? It would be impossible. You'll say, I want to meditate. No, I want to have food. No, I want to watch TV. No, I want to do this. And then you say, no, okay, I guess I'll meditate now. Oh, wait a second, I have to do that. And we'll never actually do anything spiritual because we have too many other desires that occupy our mind, attachments that occupy our mind. So this is why the Saint Ramakrishna Deva, who was the guru of Swami Vivekananda, he once said, growth in devotion to the Lord is directly proportionate to detachment from the objects of the senses. Isn't that beautiful? Growth in devotion to the Lord is directly proportionate to detachment from the objects of the senses. So, That means that if we want to increase our love for God, we have to increase our detachment from objects, because there's only so much energy we can dedicate to anything. So we're portioning it out to different things. But if you can reduce the needs for these sense objects or sense pleasures, we have more energy to dedicate to God and spirituality. So, like I said, when we say detachment, we only mean the absence of attachment. It doesn't mean loathing. Some people misunderstand detachment. Oh yes, the world is horrible. You know, I have this loathing for the world and all the people in it, and I don't even want to talk with you. You know, and you see people who misinterpret the meaning of this word, and they just become very sullen all day long, and they're insensitive to other people, or and so on. Really, what it means is that we're indifferent to sense objects. If we get them, fine. If we don't get them, fine. We have no special liking for a certain person or situation, nor do we have any special dislike for, say, like a type of food, or I don't want to help that person. I'm busy with something else. No, that doesn't happen. If there's a person in need, we have no dislike for helping them either. We have no special desire to be with them, nor be away from them. So, indifference. Whatever the circumstances require, we can do that without any problem. This is the goal. I'm not saying I've attained it. And another point that we have to remember is forcing vairagyam, or forcefully trying to implement detachment, is basically nothing other than suppression. It's dangerous also, because Amma says you hold the wood under the water for some time, and you can do that, and you can keep it there by force, but as soon as you let go, it goes boing and comes back up. So that's why you see people, they go on a diet and then suddenly they get all the weight back, because it was kind of a suppression of their desire to eat, or maybe they got muscle, and then they lost it because they couldn't maintain it. They were forcing themselves to do these things. What we really want is something that's called Viveka Janya Vairagyam. Viveka means discernment, Janya means born from, and Vairagyam means non-attachment. So that's exactly what it is, non-attachment born from discernment. Now, if we can discern that something is really good for us or really bad for us, it's very easy to do the right thing. Amma's common example is she talks about like you go into the ice cream parlor, and you go in there and you order your favorite ice cream. Let's say, I don't know, strawberry ice cream, or like a chocolate sundae. Oh, and you're just sitting there salivating, waiting for it to come. And it comes. And then you take the spoon, and then I'm going to eat this thing, and you're just about to eat it, and suddenly the proprietor of the store comes running out and says, wait, I think some poison fell in that. Amma's version is, he says, and then you find out that a lizard urinated in it. My question is, how did the lizard get into that establishment in the first place? They better call the health department, right? So even more reason to not eat the ice cream. But the thing is, if there's something poisonous in there or bad for our health, we're not going to say, no, this is my favorite ice cream, I'm going to eat it. You'll say, get it away, get it off my table. So this is the knowledge that there is something harmful in that. In a split second, that changes our perception of this so-called pleasure. It's no longer an object of our interest. So here we have again a beautiful quote from the saint Jnanadev. If you haven't heard me talk about him, you better get used to it. One of my favorite commentators. He puts it in very graphic language, which as a spiritual seeker, I really appreciate it. It helps me cultivate and strengthen my dispassion also. This is what he says. Don't get offended, hopefully. In the way the tongue never hankers after food vomited out, or as one does not extend one's arms to embrace a dead body, or in the way one cannot swallow poison for fear of death, or live in the den of a tiger, or just like you cannot enter a burning house, or cannot make a cushion out of a python. Just like that, he does not like anything connected with the sense objects and does not permit the senses to contact and relish even a bit of their objects. Very strict, very, very tough, right? But these analogies, he's saying, how could you do something like that if you could look at it in this way? And he explains that a person with complete non-attachment looks upon worldly enjoyments as lying on a bed of arrows, or as in rolling in the mire of pus. He regards the attaining. He regards the idea of attaining heaven to be as despicable and filthy as the rotten flesh of a dog. I mean, the thing is, the reason why they make it so graphic is because we start off with infatuation for the world. That's where we start off. We think that this world is going to solve all our problems, and if we just choose the right things and make the right, buy the right car or house or marry the right person, now I'm going to be happy forever. They're trying to dissuade us from subscribing to such a thought process. So they have to use it's not just him. A lot of texts say things like this, just to shake us up out of our dream world. And then he says, this sort of indifference towards sense objects is propitious of securing self-attainment. He's toning it down. So if you have this kind of indifference towards sense objects, there's a good chance that you're going to secure self-attainment. And it makes the souls eligible for supreme bliss. So he's going graphic, and then he says, look, if you can just have that kind of detachment, God realization, self-realization is not far away. That's the carrot. So if we look at the world as a source of pleasure, we're definitely going to have lots of attachments to the objects there. And vice versa, if we see the world as a source of suffering, then it's not that we're not going to be preoccupied with it. We're going to be preoccupied with loathing everything in the world. The world is a source of suffering. Everybody's mean to me. Oh, my life is horrible. Look at the weather. And some people have nothing but complaints. So they're seeing the world as a source of suffering. Whereas others may be chasing after things in the world, think that there's going to be pleasure or lasting happiness there. But if we contemplate quietly, using our discernment, what conclusion will we reach? Is the world a source of happiness or sorrow? Or neither? According to Vedanta and the Mahatmas, it's a source of neither. The world is just what it is. All the things that you think are bad, they're just what they are. Like the crow. Oh, he makes so much noise. Well, he's a crow. What do you expect him to do? He's not going to sing, classical music. So you have to just accept things the way they are. If we can't do that, then it's our own fault for creating sorrow for ourselves. So we are the only ones who can pull ourselves out of that sorrow that we create. So what we really need is a neutral attitude towards all the sense objects. Then he talks about the absence of egoism. And Jnanadev has a nice passage he shares here. Conceit, action, and unnecessary talking drop from his mind as naturally as the pearls or beads do when the connecting thread is removed from a necklace. Isn't that beautiful? It means that all these things that take us away from God, they are strung together on a necklace through that concept of egoism. That egoism we have is the string that keeps all these things stuck to us. So if you can just snap that, all of them drop away. Just as the clouds remain suspended without being linked with the sky, his actions remain unconnected with the body. He lacks the remembrance even of his own existence in human form. And this is what is called freedom from egoism, which is the goal here. So if you have read Amma's biography, you would know that she used to be completely oblivious of her body all the time. And people had to keep, it was like dealing with a 2-year-old child who's just happens to know the secrets of the universe, right? She's just completely oblivious to her body. She wouldn't eat, she wouldn't sleep, she wouldn't, take care of herself. Before she was known to spiritual seekers, people would find her in a puddle of mud, just in samadhi, because she saw a cow and that reminded her of Krishna, or she heard a flute, or she saw the dark blue color of the clouds. Something like that, she would just go unconscious in samadhi. So, this is an example. She's completely unidentified with her body, which is the opposite of us. So Shankaracharya does not give any definition for that word egoism, which was taken from the Sanskrit word ahamkara. We can interpret it in two ways, I suppose. First is the usual interpretation, just simply that person is not egotistic or egoistic. A deeper definition, however, would be the absence of a strong identification with the body, like Jnanadev said. That fits Amma better, right? Just no identification with the body. It's just a tool. Sometimes when you see Amma, it's like she's not in the body. It's just she's kind of suffusing it, and then it's just a thing that she uses, and she's not at all controlled by it. You don't get that feeling at all. So the absence of strong identification with the body is extremely important, because otherwise identification with the body poses serious obstacles to us on the spiritual path. We saw in chapter 12, in verse 5, Krishna said, "Greater is the difficulty for those whose minds are set on the unmanifested," means the formless absolute, "because the goal of the unmanifested is very hard for the embodied to reach." Embody means somebody who identifies with the body, which is all of us right now. So strong body identification and self-knowledge can never go together. They're basically opposite ends of the spectrum. Because self-knowledge means knowing that I'm not the body. So how can I feel I'm the body and feel that I'm not the body at the same time? How can I feel mortal and immortal at the same time? It's impossible. So you're either one or the other. So ahamkara in Sanskrit literally means the I notion. And where does that I notion abide? Unfortunately, it abides in this body for us now, at the present moment. So the scriptures do say that we should take care of the body, because it's the vehicle to attaining knowledge of the self and, becoming one with God. And Amma also tells us to take care of our health. But that doesn't legitimize or doesn't mean that we should identify with it. It's not an excuse for identifying with the body, especially when the body's perishable nature is contrary to that what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to understand that we are imperishable, we are internal. So the more we retain that body identification, the more trouble we're going to have in realizing the goal of spirituality. So the point is, take care of the body and utilize it as a vehicle to the goal of spirituality. It's a tool. You could put it this way: use the body as a tool to go beyond the body. Just like we use the mind to go beyond the mind. And the scriptures are designed in such a way, they lead your mind to a state where you just have to drop the mind. And then you realize that the mind, that's the culmination of the mind's purpose, is to dissolve or merge into God. Or the self, same thing. So how is it possible to get that kind of detachment then? The next part of the verse tells us, fortunately. Reflection on the suffering and detriment associated with birth, death, old age, and disease. So this is the method. Basically, you observe your own body. Then you will understand all its defects. This is called dosha drishti. Dosha means like Sometimes in the archaic translations, they use the word evil, which I think for modern English is kind of misleading. It's a little strange for us. You could just call it a defect. The body's full of defects, right? It's falling apart every day. It has aches and pains, and it's limited and all that. So that those limitations or those defects are what we need to focus on. And that is how we increase our vairagya, our non-attachment, seeing the defects in things. Because if you're infatuated with something, whatever it may be, a car, a person, a house, whatever, the cure to that infatuation is seeing its negative sides. Because infatuation means you're not looking at everything. You're just seeing what you want to see, and you're completely engrossed in that. So we dwell on the defects of the body, and that helps prevent us from getting attached to it, and it can also get us out of the rut of attachment. There's a sage who lived about 1,500 years ago, and his name is Bhartarhari. He wrote a beautiful text on detachment. It's called Vairagya Shatakam, 100 verses on detachment. And he says there, like a tigress, old age is waiting to pounce on me. So even if you're 21 years old, just if you live your life thinking that, but remaining happy, then when old age comes, you'll say, oh, I was waiting for you. It took you this long to come. Okay, well, I'm ready. I knew you were going to come, so I'm not worried about it. I'm not sad. The problem is when we're young, we feel that we can experience so much joy through the body. We think it's the medium for getting all these pleasures. But now, once we get past, my age and further, of course, now that we find that the body only gives us trouble, it's not a source of any whole lot of pleasure these days, and it's not going to get any better. So our teeth give us problems, our heart, our eyes, ears, arms, legs, joints, everything starts hurting. And so it's wise to be aware of that from the beginning and don't invest a lot of, confidence in the body, or a lot of, don't expect to get a lot of happiness from the body. And also the body becomes susceptible to diseases with each progressing day. And the reality is that even young people, at any time, disease may arrive to anyone. So that's why it's mentioned here, disease as a special category. All these defects bring about misery and suffering. That's his point. And in another place, Bhartarhari describes all these brilliantly. He says, people of the same age have all gone away, and I am also on Yama's list. Yama is the Lord of Death. So Paramatmananda Swami once said in one of his talks, he said, we all have a number, we just don't know what it is. We've taken a token, we're in line to leave this body, we just don't know what our number is. So that's why we should be reflecting on these points, not out of fear, but out of maturity. Understand that, this is the nature of the world, the nature of the body. And if we live with an understanding of that, how much happier we will be, rather than having wrong notions about life and the body. The problem is that due to the lure of Maya, we forget these things over and over. So that's why we need that regular reflection that Krishna is talking about in this verse. And I love this quote from Jnanadev. He's got so much fire in him, right? And he's going to say it in a way that, this is from the standpoint of a seeker who's really, just burning with non-attachment, detachment, vairagya, and is, has so much intent on his goal. Just as a gambler is prepared to gamble again in order to recover what he has lost, or just as the son keenly watches for an opportunity to take vengeance on his father's enemy, or just as the enraged person wrathfully pursues one who has wronged him or punched him, in that way he fights against rebirth with great vigor. So he's not fighting for anything worldly. He's not really he's not a gambler, he's not any of those things. But that intense vigor to escape Maya, to escape samsara and not have to be reborn. That's how much fire he has in his belly as a spiritual seeker. It's a beautiful concept. These are not the kind of things that our mind will think of, right? I don't think in a million years we'll come up with those kind of thoughts and as a spiritual concept. So let us move on to verse 10. Asaktir anabishwangaha putradara grahadishu nityancha samachittatvam ishtanishtopapitishu papattishu ishtanishtopapatishu. There we go. So we'll keep the verse on the screen as I read a somewhat modified version. So this is a continuation of the virtues that we're supposed to develop, right? So it's not like a grammatically correct sentence. It's just more values to add to the list. Non-attachment, which is the absence of attachment, and the feeling and the absence of the feeling of mindness in respect of, I'm going to say, and clinging. Let me just read my own version. I'm not so happy with this verse actually. Non-attachment and the absence of the feeling of mindness with respect to son, wife, home, and the rest, and constant equipoise of mind. I prefer even-mindedness in both desirable and undesirable circumstances. Absence of attachment and the feeling of mindness in respect to son, wife, home, and so on, and constant even-mindedness in both desirable and undesirable circumstances. So this is this gives us 3 more virtues. We'll move into a little more explanation now. Absence of attachment, or what we could call non-attachment. Here, Shankaracharya says that attachment simply means a liking for various sense objects. So, non-attachment, in this way, we could see that perfectly in Amma's early days. In Amma's early days, you may have read Amma's biography where she actually left her house and started living on the beach. She dug a hole on the beach because she could not meditate and do her spiritual practices in her ancestral home. She, on her own, just left, and she had her little hole there on the beach, but she was exposed to the rain, the heat, the wind, everything. It didn't bother her at all because the most important thing to her was meditation and spirituality, remembrance of God. Even if if she had stayed in her house, she could have had her mom's food, she could have had a nice room, she could have had all the conveniences, at least, that were available at that time in that region. But none of those perks, so to speak, compared with the perk of being able to just be in meditation and communion with God. So it was a no-brainer for her. She just lived on the beach. And if you haven't read that part of Amma's biography, I really encourage you to do so, because all of these phases in her life are really intended as a like the how-to manual for all of us. So we cannot do exactly what she did, but that gives us a lot of inspiration. Amma went that far. At least I can do some things. I can make some effort. The next part of that verse is absence of the feeling of mindness, or absence of the clinging to things as mine. Now we talked about ahamkara, the I notion. This mindness comes from the Sanskrit word mamakara. Mama means mine. So it's, instead of saying mineness, it's really more like the mine, the notion, mine. Now, I would like to just point out one thing. You know, when I first came here to Chicago, I met a little boy who was about 1 year old. And he was so, tiny that he didn't understand the concept of, he was so tiny that even the duality of life was not clear to him. Boys, girls, there was no such thing. Yours, mine, there was nothing like that. There was no sense of I or mine for him. He was so small. But I observed that right around when he turned 2 years old, I heard him for the first time use the word mine. And he would say it like that, mine. And I was thinking to myself, wow. So from age 2 onwards, human beings start thinking mine, mine, mine. And they're still very adorable. But the mineness, or that mine notion, comes very early in life. And then from there on, it's like all downhill in terms of that point. So when a person has liking, right? We like something. We want to have it for ourselves. We're not thinking, I want this because I'm going to give it to a stranger. No. If at all we give it to somebody, we give it to somebody who is mine, right? We don't give it to some stranger. So that mine is still there inside of us very deeply. We do good things for people, but somehow they're connected to that feeling of mine. So being free from that urge goes contrary to that selfish nature that all of us have. It's just, unfortunately, the human nature that we have now. But if you are able to relinquish that, it is considered a rare virtue. So that's why this verse is encouraging us to relinquish that feeling of mineness, or the I notion, the notion of mine. Now, after hearing this, people might think, well, what is the difference between the non-attachment of this verse and the dispassion or indifference towards sense objects that was mentioned in the previous verse? If you kind of rewind the tape in your mind, you'll realize that in the previous verse, it was related to inert objects of the senses. Remember, we said everything in this world is inert. So it's like of iPhone 12, right? Latest model, if I'm not mistaken. The latest BMW, I don't know what it is. Mercedes, or a nice big house in a great neighborhood. All these things are basically, they're just inert. And we have desires for those things too. So we need detachment from those inert objects of the senses. But the purpose or the point in this verse is not that. It is that we should show all beings love and compassion equally, not just those whom we perceive to be mine, right? So we shouldn't have attachment to specific people because we feel that they belong to us. That's another wrong notion. So the other one was, the first one was inert. This we're talking about actually sentient beings. So that's why the follow-up to that point of the absence of the feeling of mineness is in respect to son, wife, home, and the rest. So all these things, it's kind of like a bouquet of attachment and mineness. So these are the typical identifications that people develop. The longer we live with certain people in the same house, the more identified we become with them. And all that comes with that, those family members, relatives, and the house, and all that, we just get identified with it. It's very hard to relinquish this. Fortunately, Amma, in her infinite compassion, somehow orchestrated my life so that I left home when I was about 18, and I hardly spent any time in that house. So it's like 12 years, from age 6 to age 18 I lived there. But after that, I was a few years in Japan, 10 years in India, 10 years in Japan again, and back. And by the time I came back to Chicago about 9 years ago, I really kind of lost track of who am I, like in terms of a house. I don't identify with America or anywhere in particular. So that prolonged period that I did spend in one house, through other prolonged periods of just not living in one place, it helped. I can say definitely it helped me relinquish that. But that's not the lifestyle of most people. Most people, they just stay in one place or they stay with the same group of people for a very long time. So it is understandable that we get that identification. And on a simple level, we can call it that mindness or the notion of mine. They belong to me. This is my wife, this is my daughter, this is my son, this is my father-in-law or my mother-in-law or whatever. My house, my car. But that when that attachment becomes very strong, it transforms into that egoism, which here is defined as complete identification with him. That's what Shankaracharya says. That when we identify so much, or he says that we identify so much that we feel the suffering of the other as our own. That could be like your car also. But in this case, he was talking about people. So, wow, feeling the suffering of others, isn't that what we're supposed to do? Yes, but it would be a positive quality if we felt the suffering equally for all beings, right? But do we? Not at all. We only feel sorrow of those who are mine, to put it in the language of a 2-year-old. Isn't it true? Right? So we can feel our own pain, and if our close friend or family member has pain, we feel that too to some degree. But a complete stranger, it's just, we don't have that same, we have to admit, we don't have the same amount of compassion and empathy. So our sense of self is just completely limited. That's why we can't do it. And our concern is only towards those whom we consider to be mine. In truth, if we cannot consider everyone and everything to be mine, then we should just say that it all belongs to God, not me. This is the safe way. The jnani, the knower, says everything is me. Just like we say all 10 fingers are mine, or something like that. For the jnani, the knower, he says the whole universe is me. But if we can't do that, we'll just say, I have nothing, I am nothing, it's all God. I don't own anything, I'm temporarily borrowing these things. So it's very difficult to avoid that pain of attachment and mineness, because attachment is bound to come after we are together with a person or an object for a long time, sometimes for decades, right? So that's why in the old days, couples used to practice vanaprasthashrama. So after householder life, or grihasthashrama, the next step would be to sort of retreat from society to a large degree, not completely perhaps, but to a large degree, and live in a place, like a sequestered place away from society, like one of Amma's ashrams, or, even today, Amma's ashrams, a lot of them basically fit that description, and gives people a chance to step back from society and prepare for the final renunciation, which is sannyasa. But while you're a grahastha, while you're a householder, what can you do? That's what people are going to be thinking, right? Well, there are some ways. But they require a lot of self-awareness, awareness of what's going on in our mind. When that identification comes in our mind to a person, or it could be a possession, we can try to visualize that person, particularly for people it's easier. You visualize that person as Amma in a different form. So this is Amma coming to me in the form of so-and-so. And then in our mind, we take that physical form that your relative or your house, a member of your family has, take their form and you just merge it into Amma. Or you dissolve their form in your mind and put Amma's form there. So you imagine your wife or your husband or your child is talking to you, or your parent is talking to you, but it's Amma talking to you, but it's the same thing that your dad or mom would always say to you, or your, whichever family member it is. So when you have Amma's face saying that same thing to you, you'll be like, wow, this is a lot easier to accept. or I think I can really get along with this person now because they look like Amma. So it makes a really nice meditation, I feel. And another technique is to keep reminding ourselves that we're only together temporarily due to our karma, right? You have common karma, and so we're living under the same roof because of that. Even if it's just a roommate, there's some karmic connection there, right? And our goal is to get rid of that karma, not to get rid of that person, right? Getting rid of the person is not going to help anything because the karma remains. So be sure that you say, okay, we got this karma, we got to work it out, and we're here for a reason, and I'm going to finish off the karma, not the person. And that reminds me of a funny story Amma once told. She said a woman came home one day, and she says, honey, pack your bags. I won the lottery. And he's like, what? Oh my gosh, you won the lottery? Oh God, millions of dollars. And then he said, wait a second, what should I pack? Oh, she says, pack your bags, right? And he says, so what should I pack my bags for? Like, are we going to the mountains or the ocean, or are we going overseas? And she says, I don't care where you go, just get out, right? Because she's so fed up with him that she's like, I hit the lottery and I don't need you anymore. You're out of here. So the point is that, people think that the other person or somebody is a problem in their life. And the lottery is not a solution for life either. So both assumptions are wrong in the story. So this is one of those things that we should remind us when we feel somebody is the problem in our life. And we may have been with these people, a few times in recent births, but we should remember that they are one of millions of such people. So in the big picture, they're not so significant. When you leave, you have to leave the body. So you're like, okay, hopefully this is the last time. If it's not, then I have other people, more karma I have to work on. Just be very, calm and collected about it. Because maybe in the last birth, we were not even the same species. I was a donkey and she was my owner, or she might say, I was a cat and he was the next door dog and barking at me all the time. We don't know how the karma came from the past lives. Really. So either way, we came together in this life. And it's like we happen to be in the same compartment of the train, but we don't know what, station the other one's going to get off at. I'm going all the way to New York, but maybe he's going to get off or she's going to get off in Chicago or Pittsburgh or something, and then I'll be on my own till the end. So this is a safer way of looking at the family connections, the members. We're really strangers who are temporarily sharing the same compartment on a train. So we can love each other while we're together, but make sure we don't have any regrets at the end. Because we all got in the train only to get off of it. And the journey continues. That's what death is. It's the next step of our journey. And we have always taken that, billions and billions of times, we've taken that next step, leaving this body for another one. But we always take that next step alone. We have always done that. We just forget. So that's why Krishna is really encouraging us to remember all these things. Because at the critical moment, it's not going to come to us if we haven't thought of it once before that. The difference is this lifetime we're trying to take that train and bring it to a grinding halt so we don't have to come back again. That's the difference this time around. But keep in mind, when there's a tragedy and family members are grieving, it's not the time for Vedanta. I'm saying this because it's a Vedanta class, Gita class. Don't try to be like a Gita teacher when somebody's grieving from a loss. It's not the right thing to do. They'll eventually warm up to that and then realize that they need a lot of spiritual wisdom to transcend all the challenges that life poses when we're unprepared. The next part of the verse is even-mindedness in both desirable and undesirable circumstances. That means that if we can improve our situation, do so. Take action, but don't complain about others. Don't just lament your fate. Don't criticize others' words and actions and blame them for, your situation. If you can change it, do it. Change it. But if it's a choiceless situation like Arjuna has, he's sitting in the battlefield. He cannot do anything other than what he has already been, prepared to do, fight the war. So in such circumstances, all we can do, also just like he prayed to Krishna, we can pray to Amma to give us the strength to face the inevitable. We can pray saying something like, "Oh Amma, through this challenging time, may I become purified and emerge stronger, wiser, and more mature." Because we may run out of options despite our best efforts. So we can just say, "I accept it, Amma, because you are with me." And then we can also think, how different it's going to seem to us 10 years from now, 15 years from now. Is it going to feel the same as it feels now? So much, mental agony and anguish. It's definitely not going to feel the same way. I remember it was about 15 years ago in Japan. I was having a lot of trouble. Somehow there was a lot of disharmony between all the coordinators, and I foolishly kind of poised myself in between the two sides and tried to be the peacemaker. Well, you know what happens then. Well, now I learned what happens then. You say, "Don't shoot the messenger." Well, that's what the messenger is there for, right? To get shot, basically. You try to make the peace, and you go talk with A, and then you tell B, and it's not the right way to go about, If it's Amma, it works, but it backfired, and then everybody hated me basically for some time. It was like a really bad experience for me, but I learned a very good lesson. And when I was in the the nadir and the doldrums, completely distraught, I told him, I feel like I'm just in the depth of hell right now. And then she consoled me, and then she said, we create these circumstances through our attachment. It was being created from a long time ago through the attachment that we slowly accumulated, and now simply the fruit has blossomed. The fruit has come, and we're experiencing what we ourselves created. So what could I say? She was right. So I don't do that anymore. So in case you're wondering, if you ask me to be a negotiator between you and somebody else, I think I'll probably give you some advice and let you deal with it. Because if that person wants to hear advice, we can do it. But otherwise, the person has to be interested in advice. The final portion of the verse reminds us of a very well-known verse from chapter 2, verse 48, which goes, "Established in yoga, perform actions having abandoned attachment, remaining even-minded in success and failure. Balance of mind is called yoga." So this is a beautiful summary, the essence of karma yoga. And with that, we will move on to verse 11, where we get 3 more values. Mai chananya yogena bhaktir avyabicharini viviktadesha sevitvam aratir janasamsadi. I'll read my version of it. Unswerving devotion to me through the yoga of non-separation, living in holy and solitary places, distaste for crowds. Once again, unswerving devotion to me through the yoga of non-separation, living in holy and solitary, or we could say sequestered places, distaste for crowds. So, let's go one by one. These are the three values. It may be a little hard to accept all of them as being virtues, but we'll see why. What about unflinching devotion to me through the yoga of non-separation? What does that mean? Shankaracharya explains it nicely here. He says, the conviction that there is nothing other than the Lord Vasudeva. So, one more time, I'll say that. The conviction that there is nothing other than the Lord Vasudeva. So He alone is our refuge. This is devotion with attachment to nothing else. And unwavering devotion is that which is inspired by unshakable conviction. I really like this because it shows that devotion comes actually from conviction. Conviction that this is the best thing. This is the most important thing. Nothing is more important than this. But also that conviction shouldn't waver. We have to maintain that conviction throughout our spiritual life, right? So here, in this first part of the verse, Krishna is definitely emphasizing the importance of devotion, bhakti, as a source of inspiration. Despite all our efforts to strengthen our discernment and our dispassion, I think all of us find that we run up against a brick wall at one point, and we struggle to proceed from there. Amma also said that once. I remember it was a long time ago. I can't even remember how long ago it was. Myself and some brahmacharis were in Amma's room for room darshan, and she was telling us that, the guru, I mean, obviously she's referring to herself included, the guru leads the disciple on the path as far as the disciple can come. And the guru is ready to lead farther. The guru can lead them all the way to moksha, of course. But on the side of the disciple, he or she at one point can hit a brick wall. We get to the point where we really feel like we're really struggling to transcend our vasanas. The Amma cannot transcend our vasanas for us, right? We have to transcend them. We have to become stronger. So Amma says, at that point, what happens if they cannot learn from the guru anymore, they will end up having to learn from the world. And that happens. Like I told my Japan story, I learned things from the world that I could not realize earlier because I had, must have been, I was, like Amma said, I was stuck with one of my attachments somewhere. So it's important that we have a support when we're on the path. Even Yudhishthira, who is considered to be the embodiment of Dharma in the Mahabharata, he also had troubles. He was said to have such perfect discernment and judgment. And even though he had Lord Krishna with him, just like we have Amma, who is, Krishna, Kali, everything rolled into one. He was alive at the time of Krishna, and they were friends, but still Yudhishthira lost his confidence on occasion. He felt like, I'm doomed, I'm the most unfortunate person in the world. He had really down times. So perhaps that was inserted into the story to make us feel better. Like if even Yudhishthira had it, then I'm going to be okay. So it shows that a seeker can always have some seemingly unsurmountable challenges in their life. And, we may feel like that at some time. So Amma says that at such times, instead of abandoning our faith, we should hold on to God's feet, or we will have to say Amma's feet, even tighter than before. That's the beauty of devotion, I feel, that it shines even brighter in times of difficulty, in times of darkness. And when we are in the darkness, we seek that light so much more. It seems that many of the senior swamis who came to Amma in the beginning, not including myself, the senior ones who you probably know, seems that many of them were in the Rahu period, which is a period in astrology where you feel a lot of darkness and confusion about life, and you're because of that, in that darkness, you're seeking the light all the more. And so that's not a surprise for me, because I met Amma when I was in Rahu also. I'm not one of the first disciples by any stretch of the imagination, but I was really confused and I wasn't sure what to do with my life. And at that time, that light from Amma really just made a huge difference in my life. That's what I was looking for, even though I didn't know it. So that devotion can save us from a very tragic outcome from the challenges in life. But people may ask you, and you should be ready to reply, because we're on the topic of devotion. Let's say somebody says, isn't such devotion just another form of attachment? What will you say if they ask you that? I don't know. You don't want to say, I don't know. Yes, it is a form of attachment, we could say. But it's the one attachment that helps us transcend all other attachments. Just like the mantra is the one thought that keeps all other thoughts from entering the mind, devotion to the Guru, that all-consuming love, is the love, or you could call it a lower level of attachment in the beginning, that prevents us from getting attached to everything in life, right? And then that Guru, their whole life purpose is to help us be free from all attachment. So ultimately they will relinquish that. They will make us relinquish that attachment to the Guru as well. Then this part about living in holy and solitary places. Shankaracharya gives a little more, description here, which is helpful. He says, places like forests, riverbanks, temples, etc. And the part after that tells us what those areas, forests, riverbanks, what they were like back in Shankaracharya's days, which is at least 1,200 years ago, if not 2,500 years ago. He says, where it's naturally free from unwelcome intruders, like snakes, thieves, tigers, those kind of things. India has tigers, right? And they used to have a lot more. So if you go to the forest, you might see a tiger. So you're going to the forest, but not the forest where the tigers are. So we can also think of what is the modern version of that. Basically, he says that too, fortunately. It's in such a spot where the mind is peaceful and thoughts of the self come more easily. So to me, it's like all of Amma's ashrams are exactly that. You just live in one of Amma's ashrams, or you go to Puri, whatever it is, you're going to have that opportunity. And why do we need that? Because most of us are active, at least to a certain point of life. And we will associate with a lot of different people, and we're trying to do things, so the mind becomes extrovert. Just impossible to avoid that, unless you're already a Mahatma, but that's not what we're talking about here. The effect of our worldly activities is definitely going to remain in our mind, and that makes it very difficult for us to think about the self, the Atman, throughout the day. Even when you sit down, it takes some time to quiet, for the mind to become quiet. But a solitary place, kind of off the beaten track, we have so many ashrams like that around the world. We have San Ramon, we have Dallas Ashram, we have Chicago, we have DC, we have all the ashrams around North America and other countries. Europe, I love the European ashrams also. So they all provide some solitary place where you can calm your mind and look within. And that's what Amma wants. Not just that, but once we get that mental peace and quiet within, our mind is now strengthened enough that we can offer some service to the world. So if your mind is completely, filled with agitation, you're not going to be in a mood to help anybody. You just want help yourself. So if you go to the ashram and you can calm your mind down, then you can start thinking about serving the world and serving humanity. So these centers are are here so that anyone can come and just click the reset button on their mind. Wouldn't that be nice to have a little button? Reset, reboot. That's what the ashrams are for. And if you live there, you're constantly fresh. So you can reconnect with Amma and yourself in such a place like an ashram. It's very different from an online experience, I must say. And this taste for crowds, this one deserves a little explanation. It really means not reveling in the company of extremely worldly people. I'll have to say extremely. Because, pretty much everybody is worldly these days, but extremely worldly people are going to take away from all our spiritual effort. There are some people who just can't sit still, and they're always looking for people to hang out with, and then they want to go do something, because they're restless. Then their restlessness will rub off on us. So, because, really all these things are like a placebo for forgetting our worries and problems. It doesn't really cure the problem. It's just like taking an aspirin. So what we want is a permanent solution. But if we hang out with people who just treat the symptoms temporarily, then we'll start thinking like that. So the idea is don't spend a lot of time with people who are not interested in a permanent solution to life. If you're having a meeting at work or something, obviously it's different. You have a purpose. It's your job, or you're creating something, instead of just gossiping, because if there's no specific purpose, typically what happens is people sort of engage in their lower vasanas. They start criticizing, that guy, he's a dumb person, or I don't like him, or I don't like that, this or that, criticizing somebody somewhere and indulging, and ruining our lives. So instead, we can use that time, even with the same people, to read Amma's teachings. Maybe we can all together cook something for a Hesed house. Then we can have fun and excitement, but it's tied to a higher purpose now. Something that's serving, doing good for the world. These are totally different, right? Shankaracharya explains by saying, it is aversion to crowds of people who are degenerate. I don't know about this translation, but that's how it comes out. Degenerate, unrefined, uncultured. This is what is implied. Not cultured and disciplined people. Association with cultured and disciplined people promotes knowledge, right? So it's not that the number of people matters, except for COVID times, but typically, if it's a big group of people who are really devoted and they want to, chant archana or sing bhajans or have a puja or something like that, great, let's have lots of those people together, with the proper social distancing right now. This is the idea. It's that you don't want to have, a lot of association with people who are going to steer you off the path. So with Amma devotees, gathering means we're just going to talk about Amma, maybe sing some bhajans, talk about bhakti, puja, meditation, spiritual wisdom, spiritual growth. So it's actually contributing, it's conducive to spiritual growth. So let us move on to the last verse for today, verse 12. Adhyatma jnana nityatvam tattva jnanartha darshanam etagñanam iti proktam ajñanam yadatonyatha. What I have here is fixity in self-knowledge and observing the goal of knowledge of the truth. This is declared to be knowledge, and what is other than or contrary to this is ignorance. Fixity in self-knowledge and observing the goal of knowledge of the truth. This is declared to be knowledge, and what is other than that is ignorance. Okay. So this is basically just 2 virtues. So we had 3, that's 9, and we have 2 more, so now it's 11, and we had 9 last week, so 20. So he's giving us 2 more virtues and a summary at the end. And about this verse, Jnanadev writes 15 pages, which is so far the longest I've seen. Why so much? Actually, the majority of it is about ajnanam, is about ignorance. So he's teaching us through that all these things. If you're doing any one of those, you're heading towards spiritual ignorance. Now, all you have to do is do the opposite of that, and you'll be going in the right direction. So I think a lot of us could benefit from reading that long explanation of what ignorance consists of, because a lot of these things we're doing. But let's come back to the actual verse. He says, fixity and self-knowledge. So this means that we're constantly aware of moksha, of God realization, as the goal of our life. This is actually somewhat overlapping with the second part, which is observing the goal of knowledge of the truth. Krishna said in chapter 2, verse 41, "To the firm in mind, O joy of the Kurus, there is in this but one decision." In other words, spirituality. There's only one path to go. It's very clear to them because they're firm in mind. "But many branching and endless are the decisions of the infirm in mind." So he's praising those who have a clear picture of the path and how to go about it, how to reach moksha. But those who are like, I'm going to try 50 different meditation techniques, they're just not going to get anywhere. That's the point he's making. So the people who forget the goal of life have many goals. So if moksha is not our number one purpose, goal in life, we may have like 100. Somewhere in that 100, moksha is there. So maybe 1/100th of the time we might be thinking of moksha. So, but we have 99 other things that we're thinking about, so our strength, our mental strength gets dissipated. But if you have this virtue, you don't have that problem. Moksha as your goal will always be there in the mind. That's why observing the goal of knowledge of the truth. So knowing the truth, knowing God. And truth means God, the self, whatever you want to call it. Here it's just called the truth. That knowing that truth is the goal of life. And constantly observing or remembering that, seeing that. That's the word that's used here. So in this is the final virtue, but it's also the most important one for now. It means different things in this verse because he uses that word several times, right? Initially, it means the traditional process of learning the Guru's teachings, Guru Upadesha, reflecting on those teachings and removing one's confusion, followed by a long period of assimilation to make that knowledge our own through deep meditation. This is what's called Shravana Manana and Nididhyasana. So that is the path, but the goal is also knowledge, right? So the virtues are praised as being knowledge, and the goal is self-knowledge also. So it's like saying, where are you? You're on the phone. It's, I'm on the Chicago train. Oh, you're in Chicago? No, I'm on the train to Chicago. We just call it the Chicago train, right? So it's like that these virtues are knowledge, not because you have already known who you are. You don't have self-knowledge yet. You're on the train to self-knowledge. So it's good enough as knowledge for us now. So this is the path of cultivating the needed virtues to achieve the supreme knowledge of the self. But if we observe these values, these virtues, but never immerse ourselves in the Guru's teachings, it's incomplete. And the opposite is impossible. You cannot understand the Guru's teachings fully without cultivating these virtues. So they support each other. They're complementary. But you have to start with the virtues and a little bit of the knowledge, little by little, like we're doing here. We're not reading the whole Gita in one night, right? 4 verses is enough for us to contemplate and practice for a week. So by now we should understand how these virtues, these do's and don'ts, prepare us for that final medicine of the Guru's teachings, of self-knowledge, of Vedanta, Advaita. That's all that it is. And the bhakti can also become the medicine on one very strict condition, that it is the highest form of bhakti. Now we have to backtrack to chapter 12. The highest form of bhakti was knowledge, right? The feeling of separation from me and God dissolves in that completely pure love, because love is oneness in its purest form. So that's the idea. It can be bhakti, but by the time it reaches that level, there's no God in me. There's no distance between me and God. So you can also say it's not actually bhakti, because bhakti requires a worshipper and an object of worship. But the highest form of devotion is where those two merge and there's no difference. So that's where bhakti actually becomes one with jnana yoga. But until we deepen our understanding of the Guru's teachings, we may be peaceful under certain circumstances, after we sing a bhajan or after we do archana or whatever, but we're going to be very disturbed in other circumstances. So it's only temporary peace of mind until we dive deep into the Guru's teachings. So you tell me whether you need it or not. Because if you never have any mental agitation, then you don't need it. But I need it. I can tell you that I need it. So the solution is to take our devotion deeper. And Amma calls it Tattvatile Bhakti, or Bhakti, devotion rooted in spiritual principles. And then we will remember the teachings throughout the day, because it's the main focus of our mind. We can allow other topics to come in the mind, but they're never going to be the primary thought of our life. We should never let that happen. That's when we get into trouble. And I will give you a short sample of what Jnanadev wrote as indications of ignorance, the opposite of knowledge. This is one more recent commentator from the late 20th century. And he actually went to the trouble of listing a lot of the qualities that are contrary to what Krishna recommends that we develop. It's like the don't do this version, right? So how about vanity, self-admiration, revengefulness, lack of respect for the teacher, fickleness, self-indulgence, perception of pleasure in bodily life. All of these things, we suffer from them at different times. So if you read that, it kind of sounds like our whole life. So we have to admit that we have, some homework, big homework assignment that he's giving us here. But we can also reverse the logic and say, Amma is taking us from this kind of ignorance, asatoma sadgamaya, right? From this ignorance that we are wallowing in right now. She's taking us from that, which is contrary to nature, to the knowledge that is contrary to ignorance. So this is the only way she can help us dispel our ignorance. She has to lead us towards spiritual knowledge. Only that will save us, because all of our problems are really due to that spiritual ignorance. When we first met Amma, we were like this description, full of vanity, full of, pleasure seeking and all that. And she is the only one who is doing her best to drag us towards the virtues enumerated in verses 8 through 12. So we can thank her for that, even though she does it sometimes against our will. I remember when I first joined the ashram, I looked at the Kali Murti, and I said, Amma, I used to pray to her, chop my head off, intending that it was, my ego. And then once the pain starts happening, you're like, wow, I guess I'm getting what I prayed for. So we can't complain, but she is really doing her best to drag us towards the light. And that same saint, Ramakrishna Deva, he also said, how is it that we are not able to contact God who is all-pervading? You would think you'd be able to contact it, right? Standing by the side of a pond covered with moss and reeds, one might think that there's no water in it. But if he pushes aside the moss, he can see the water below. Similarly, Maya, with her concealing power, has to be brushed aside from our mind before we are blessed with a vision of the all-pervading God. So with this, the topic of jnana, of knowledge in the form of virtues, is over. Some topics remain, but what Krishna is going to talk about next is that which is ought to be known. Jnanadev says here, he narrates, from a first-person standpoint. Hear now attentively what Lord Krishna said to Arjuna. O son of Pandu, the entire group of symptoms you now heard is from ignorance. You should now turn your back on ignorance and be quite firm in regard to knowledge. Arjuna felt anxious to know how the acquisition of knowledge will enable him to attain the object of knowledge. Realizing Arjuna's wish, the master of all, the all-knowing one, said, hear now what I tell you about that which should be known, which we will all find out next week. I have about 3 minutes to try to answer some questions. Please forgive me if I go a couple minutes over. These are the questions that I have today, not too many. If they were sent just a little while ago, I might have missed them, but we can do those next week. The questions, by the way, are not always relevant to the Bhagavad Gita, so just they can ask other questions, and they have. Please explain the movements of the arati lamp and why we do arati in the first place. Well, the one thing that, Amma really loves is remembrance of God. She's even told that story about God telling one of his devotees that he loves the puja he's doing, but what he wants is the Chaitanya Pushpa, the Chaitanya flower. And the guy went running all over the world trying to find it, and he couldn't find it. So he said to God, all I can do is offer you my remembrance. And then God appeared before him and said, that's what that flower is. It's the flower of your consciousness, your thoughts, your remembrance. So how do you offer remembrance to somebody? There's no way to do it like in a ritual way. So the closest thing, fire has always been a symbol for consciousness, for awareness. So we light that camphor as a sign that this is our remembrance, our consciousness, our thoughts that we're offering to you, Lord. And we wave it in a clockwise direction, because clockwise, now you're looking at me from the other side, so it looks counterclockwise. But from our standpoint, we do it clockwise, like this, right? That's considered to be auspicious. And there's a lot of reasons explained for that in a kind of occult way, but we won't go into that. It's auspicious, consider it that. And also, the usage of camphor is also symbolic because it burns completely, leaving no trace. So in another sense, that fire represents our ego, because we are not pure consciousness yet. We haven't realized that pure consciousness yet. So the camphor is the ego, so to speak, and that fire of pure consciousness is burning that ego, leaving no residue, and so we merge in consciousness. That's the goal of life, is to realize that. So this is the symbolism behind arati. The next question was, have many photos of Amma in home but seldom pay them any attention. Any suggestions? Well, when I read this question, I thought to ask a counter question, or suggestion. Ask yourself, if my mind is not interested in Amma, what is my mind interested in? Do we know? Have we paid attention to that? What does my mind pay attention to most of the time? We should really give some thought to that. If I'm not thinking about Amma throughout the day, what am I thinking of? If I'm not chanting my mantra, what am I thinking of? So I used to set an alarm, a repeating alarm. Like every hour, it would go off, and I would stop and say, what am I thinking about right now? Am I thinking about Amma? And I just, you have to do it over and over again. Because when the mind will immediately go off somewhere, Peru, then Alaska, and Amma says it goes to the moon and back. Yeah. So there's no trick to it, except for awareness of what the mind is doing. If you're thinking of something completely ridiculous, then the next thought can be, Amma, why am I thinking of that? You bring Amma into the picture. And then you look at her photo and you say, Amma, why was I thinking of that? It's totally irrelevant. It has nothing to do with my spiritual growth. You have to help me stop thinking about these kind of things. This is what I do sometimes. So why am I thinking of that? Are such things conducive to peace and happiness? If not, then tell the mind that Amma's photo is a symbol of all the things that you truly pray for in life. The mind wants things too, right? Well, Amma is a symbol of all those good things. So instead of having a billion thoughts about all the things we want, just look at Amma and say, she is everything that I want and need. So I'm just going to look at her. It's like Ganesha, Instead of racing around the universe with his brother, who was much faster, his brother went shooting off to circumambulate the whole universe. But Ganesha just walked right around his parents, Shiva and Parvati, and he said, I just walked around the universe. It was true. So instead of trying to think of everything, we just think about Amma. She's a symbol of everything, the totality. So the mind should look at the photos over and over and again to make sure that it understands that symbolism. Then it will be more likely to go back to Amma's photo whenever we need it, which is always, but especially needed. I remember in one of the videos from Amma's Heart on YouTube, she says that we should defeat tamas with rajas and defeat rajas with sattva. I'm wondering if you have any practical guidance and examples on how to defeat rajas with tamas. I think they said it the wrong way, tamas with rajas, and especially how to intentionally wield sattva in order to overcome rajas. Okay. This is just what came to me. You can take it or leave it. When the mind craves selfishness, this is definitely a clear indication of tamas. Tamas means, we want something and we don't care about anybody else. It's just for me. So then, you first make the mind work for the sake of a greater good. Let's say you have a desire to have ice cream or something, and then the mind's requesting that or demanding it. You say, okay, just think of the mind as like a 3-year-old kid. And then you say, okay, ice cream. Well, I'll give you ice cream if you do something for all the starving people and, that Amma's helping, or the houses, or the women who lost their husbands, or the single mothers. These, the people that Amma's supporting in India throughout, the flood victims, whatever it may be. You say, you have to do something for them, and then we can talk about it. Something that's good for everybody, not just us, not just me. So you can make the mind remember how many people don't have anything, and you have to teach the mind gratitude for what it has now. After that activity, if the mind is still complaining, you can give it a small bit of ice cream. Never give the mind what it wants without making it earn it. It has to practice selflessness to get those things that it wants. And you're the only one that can make it do it. So if the mind wants to indulge, you make it do tapas first. Make it feel the pain that all the suffering people feel day in and day out. That way, the mind gradually cultivates compassion. and transforming rajas into sattva. See, all these things, you're making the mind cooperate with something you're doing, right? But then that's rajas. But now, how do we make that rajas to sattva? Basically, the only way to do it is through sadhana, because doing something is never going to be sattva, because that's not what sattva is. Sattva is a frame of mind. It's your inner state of being. So you can be doing something with a sattvic mind, the sattvic bhava feeling inside, but there's not like a sattvic activity per se. Even a puja, if you do it with a disturbed mind, it's not going to feel sattvic. So start with the practices that appeal to you, whether it's archana, bhajan, meditation, mantra japa. You have to do those as much as you can. Increase it, the things you like, but not only that. Gradually, you have to incorporate the sadhanas that your mind has a resistance to. That's where the sattva is really going to come. The more you can challenge the mind to embrace those spiritual techniques that it resists, that it doesn't like or it's not interested in, that will really help you cultivate more sattva in your mind. So this is what I can suggest. Don't think of converting rajas to sattva as an action. It is something that we can do through our sadhana by making the mind go slowly, little by little, going upstream against the flow of its likes and dislikes. Then you reduce those. Because rajas comes from the likes and dislikes. That's why I'm saying it. We have to somehow surmount those. And this is the way to do it. At least that's what came to me now. If I think of anything else, I'll bring it up. Someone was sad that they missed the class on March 18th. But as far as I know, there wasn't a class on that day, unless somebody had it without me, as I had to go out of town, so I couldn't do the class at that time. So don't feel bad, you didn't miss anything. We did go over time, I'm very sorry. We will close with asatoma and lokaha and have a brief silent meditation where we contemplate on these teachings and try to assimilate them even just a little bit before we close today. So those who are busy or don't have time, you can go after we chant asatoma and loka. Om asatoma sadgamaya tamasoma jyotirgamaya mrityorma amritam gamaya. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. So Om Namah Shivaya. If you have some time, let's have a silent meditation for a few more minutes. And observe your mind as you do so. First, just check your posture. Try to keep your spine and neck straight. Close your eyes and take a few long, deep breaths, feeling the body and mind relaxing further and further. Just try to slow down the breath, and the thoughts will also slow down. And then for every thought that it happens to appear in your mind, replace it with Amma's, a vision of Amma's form, as a symbol of the supreme goal of spirituality. Or you can use some other symbol for the ultimate goal of life. But replace all the stray thoughts with a symbol of that and try to keep the mind focused. Now we will close with one final prayer. Take a deep breath. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnad Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. One more long deep breath. And as you exhale, slowly open your eyes. Namah Shivaya. Once again, thank you for joining us. And if you didn't already know, I'm pretty sure Amma's having a public live stream on Saturday. And we will have some bhajans, just a few bhajans that evening. But the main event is Amma's program, Saturday morning, if you're in the Northern America. And hope everybody participates in that. I'm sure.